Hello and welcome to tonight's program. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, and we'd love to hear where you heard about tonight's program. And I'm also dropping a little question in the chat for folks to think about as we get started. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Thanks so much for being here this evening. This program is part of the Free Libraries for the Greatest Number exhibition, and we'll be getting started in just a few minutes with our panelists. In the meantime, if you'd like to drop in the chat where you heard about tonight's program, and also tell us a little bit about what comes to mind when you hear the term New Deal. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing some answers come in. FDR. We'll be talking a little bit more about that tonight. And for those of you that are just joining us, we're going to be getting started in just a few minutes. And in the meantime, if you'd like to let us know how you heard about tonight's program, where you're coming from, as well as a little bit about what comes to mind when you hear the term New Deal. An artist being paid to support civic works. Wonderful, thank you. We have another answer here. Parkway Central third floor exhibit and FLP bulletins, so Free Library of Philadelphia bulletins. Thank you for sharing that answer. All right, I'll give folks just another minute or two to trickle in. My name is Susanna Raminska. I'm here with the Free Library of Philadelphia as curator of exhibitions, and we have a wonderful lineup tonight, a wonderful group of panelists here to share a little bit about their interests and their expertise. And this program is part of For the Greatest Number, which is an exhibit that we currently have at Parkway Central on the third floor in the Dietrich Gallery. And I'll be sharing a link with more details on that shortly. And we have a question in the chat. When you hear the term New Deal, what comes to mind? And we have a couple of answers. We have FDR, we have artists being paid to support civic works. We have a reference to the Free Library exhibit. And then we also have an answer here, a jobs program, not a grant program. Interesting. Thank you for sharing. And if you'd like to share with us where you heard about tonight's program or where you're coming from, feel free to add that in the chat as well. All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Susanna Raminska. I'm with the Free Library of Philadelphia as curator of exhibitions, and it's a really great honor to be here with this amazing group of panelists this evening. Everyone is going to introduce themselves in just a few moments, but in the meantime, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what brings us here this evening. We have a wonderful exhibit. It is called For the Greatest Number, and it's on view through early February of next year. And it's available at Parkway Central Library, 1901 Vine Street during our open hours, which currently are Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And we also have a link that I'll be dropping shortly with additional online offerings that you can engage with and more information about the exhibit, including some really engaging blog posts. The material that was used in the exhibit comes from the Free Library of Philadelphia and was curated by two of my colleagues, Laura Streffolino and Caitlin Goodman, and they offer a really wonderful interpretation of those materials that in many ways inspires this panel discussion this evening. So I want to take an opportunity to have each panelist be able to introduce themselves, and then we're going to take about half an hour to have a conversation with some guiding questions. And then we'll have a chance at around 7:45 to hear your questions. You can use the chat to drop your questions in, and I'll have a chance to read them out loud starting at around 7:45. And along the way, we'll be sharing more information about the exhibition at the Free Library, as well as other resources and services that you can engage with that our panelists are going to be talking about. So thank you again for being here. And Justin, if you could start us off with an introduction, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Justin DiBeradinis. Currently, I'm the director of FDR Park in South Philadelphia with Philadelphia Parks and Recreation. Started my career in community organizing in Kensington section of the city in the River Wards. That was where I was born and grew up, and then have bounced between city government and parks over my career. And now I do both together. So, and it's a happy place to be.
Thank you so much for joining us, Justin. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say tonight. And next we have LaNeshe Miller-White.
Hello, my name is LaNeshe Miller-White. I am the executive director of Theater Philadelphia, which is an umbrella organization for theater within the region. We do the Barrymore Awards, Philadelphia Theater Week. We've had an emergency relief program going since COVID started. I'm also the executive director of Theater in the X, which is a West Philly-based theater company dedicated to providing opportunities for artists of color. And our flagship show is a free performance every August in Malcolm X Park. We also focus on providing and telling the stories of people of color.
Thank you so much, LaNeshe. And Councilwoman Kendra Brooks.
Hello, my name is Kendra Brooks. I am a council member here for the city of Philadelphia. I am the first Working Families Party city council member and elected official here in the city in over 70 years. I too have deep started in community organizing, primarily around schools, which kind of launched my interest in politics and kind of paved the way for me to be an elected official now and also to be a part of this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And last but not least, Keon Liberato.
Hey, everybody. Yes, my name is Keon Liberato. I'm a railroad track maintainer. And basically maintaining Northeast Corridor rail lines. And I'm also the president of Teamsters Local 3012 of the Brotherhood of Maintenance Away Division of the IBT. And I'm just honored to be here having this conversation. It seems like a beautiful time to be talking about this new deal or creating a new deal. So thank you.
Thank you. So I want to start us off with our conversation, and I think Keon, you have a lot to share on this topic, but I would welcome all of our panelists to share their knowledge and their expertise. When we think back to the 1930s, a time when we're coming out of the Great Depression, I'd love to hear more about what you all know about what it was like to work in Philadelphia in the 1930s, and to then kind of move into thinking about what worker experiences are like today.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question because there are obviously some differences, but there's also a lot. There's a lot of commonalities that some would be surprised to hear about. Like, so I'll start with what's in common. We're I guess technically we're not in a depression or a recession, whatever that but whatever technical means, the economists have. However, working people across the country are feeling it pretty badly, right? Not feeling like they're making good wages, not feeling like they have good benefits, not feeling like they're making good use of their time. And that was very similar, to the 1930s, right? And so I made a list of a few things that are pretty similar. One is that, you still have millions of people right now that do not have adequate healthcare that are working. And that was true in Philadelphia at the time in the 30s. You still have millions of people who are working low-wage jobs. That was also true in Philadelphia and is true today. Unionization rates were hovering around between 6 and 8%, actually, at that time. And today, the unionization rate in the private sector is right around 6%, and overall, just under 11%. So, that's also another thing. But another big thing was that workers started to rise, right? There started to be a burgeoning labor movement, regardless of unionization rates, in which workers started to organize themselves, started to demand new working conditions, safe working conditions, housing policies, healthcare, you name it. And we're starting to see a little bit of that right now. We started to see some of that during the height of the pandemic, with workers organizing around basic safety in the workplace, dealing with COVID. And we're starting to see it now with workers willing to go on strike and take strike votes in order to get the types of contracts that they deserve, and other workers organizing for the right to have their union recognized. So I think that those are some of the big things that I'm noticing that are very, very much in common today, just to start off.
Thank you for sharing that. Do any of our other panelists want to add?
Susanna, I would just say that in sort of our period of strife in the 1930s and in our periods of strife during the Civil War movement, anti-war movement, in our periods of strife today, you can take the temperature of what's going on very clearly in public space. I think some of the parallels, and I think public space includes the streets. It's the spaces that we occupy collectively, where we had an encampment against, where people who had lack of housing in Philadelphia last summer was very close to Philadelphia's Hooverville in the 1930s. It was just at the other steps of the art museum. It was on the back side in 1930s. It was set on the front side today. I think we saw so much of what was playing out in conversations around America and race and America and our national story played out in Marconi Plaza in the last year. And so I think for good or for ill, our public spaces tend to express where we are as a people in this moment. And I think that was true in the 30s. I think it was true in the 50s and 60s. And I think it's true today. So I think that, I think that is an echo. And I would also speak, personally, as someone who works in public space, our ability to shape who we are as a people through how we handle our public space, through what expressions we allow to have happen in our streets, which was really a question for us last year in Philadelphia. So I'd say that's some of the echoes that I feel in our present moment, that as I was, reading up and preparing for this and thinking about 1930s, they just clicked. They just clicked. So I think that's something I saw just from a public space perspective.
Thank you so much, Justin. Do any of our other panelists want to share additional thoughts?
I kind of, something resonated with me when Justin talked about the encampment and what that meant. And, even down to the uprisings around social justice and what that meant right now in our era, and how it kind of mirrors that of the 1930s. And I also kind of remembered, or I began thinking about when, we were talking about, or we've been talking about this Build Back Better agenda. And as I start thinking about the things that we're asking for, many of those things are things that we don't think we should still be asking for now. How, even though that was my years is 90 years ago? I'm trying to do my math here, 60 years ago or more, we still are fighting for just basic conditions for workers. And how, even though some strides were made in the 1930s, we realized that we aren't as far as we can be or could be. And how, one of the things that keeps coming about, that whole idea around public housing, when Justin talked about the encampment and how we made so many strides back then, that also led to some bad things like redlining and discrimination. However, we still haven't risen above that for the next generation. So, we always talk about how history repeats itself. And I think that we're in a moment of seeing a lot of repetition. But I also see a moment where there's even more pushback on multiple levels because of the wins that we were able to gain over these years. So.
And kind of going back to what Keon was saying, the thing about the event that is the pandemic is that it put workers in, it kind of like pulled the wool from the eyes in many respects of like reminding how insecure people's workplaces were, people's jobs were, people's livelihoods were so easily taken away when decisions were being made to save money as things were closing. And so seeing so much forward movement again from workers for, for pay, for support of caregivers, things like, childcare and things like that, having all of these things come back to the forefront after people realized how insecure kind of the platform of their livelihoods was.
Thank you, Lanish. And actually, the next question, I think you could have a lot to contribute to. When I think about Philadelphia, and I've been here since '97, I think a lot about the many vibrant arts and culture communities that we have here, and really how engaging they are in so many ways, and really how essential they are. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit about sort of how you think we got to the place that we are now, and sort of kind of telling us a little bit more about where we are now and what you see from where you sit, and then where you think we could move to within the arts and culture realm.
Yeah, I think we're looking at kind of the tail end of a 40-ish, at least, and definitely coming, like, a lot of my background is in theater, of course. So for the theater community too, in particular, like 40-ish years ago is when you had the Ardens starting, the Wilma starting, that's when Painted Bride was starting, and all of these organizations that were at that time, like now it's hard to believe it, at that time they were self-producers. They were by and large artistic communities that turned into organizations. And we have seen that come back a lot over the past few years, and even more so when COVID hit, of artists realizing, especially when all of the venues were closed, that they had to have some capability of self-producing. And that came from, one, the need, because, venues are closed and so you weren't being hired. And I mean, immediately artists had cooking shows and daily, Facebook lives and all of these things, and people really got into their self-producing bag. And there also, but even before that, and from COVID, a lot of self-producing and smaller organizations have popped up because of a need that they saw there. So for example, even Theater in the X, we were created in 2013 because we weren't seeing work for artists of color consistently in the mainstream venues in Philadelphia's theater community. And so even more of that has come after the pandemic, one, because so many folks were out of work and they had to self-produce. They also were given time to be able to create the artwork that they wanted to create versus working within the systems of who would hire them at, the spaces that had buildings. And so we're in a really, really interesting place now where there is much more self-producing, people who are really with low resources going out and putting on, amazing productions and making amazing art. There also is, similar to, I think, just the general landscape of Philadelphia and the world, there has been so much calling out on DEI issues of representation, of diversity, across theater, globally, nationally, not just in Philadelphia. And then also with all of older, larger institutions were very much scrutinized during the time of COVID. Who's on your staff? Who's on your board? Who are you supporting? Does your organization look like the demographics of the city of Philadelphia? And so many of those questions came up throughout the pandemic era, and of course linked to the uprisings and kind of all of those things that were happening within the same time frame, and has really, I think, pushed forward the representation in arts administration, the representation on boards. It's showing in the actual work that people are producing. And so I'm hoping that that is something that is going to stay as we go forward and isn't just kind of like, a one season reaction to everything that happened in the past 18 months.
Thank you, Lanish.
And maybe just to build a little bit off of what Lanish just shared. And I'm not a history professional, but just sort of in my experience of sort of the American arc, this doesn't seem to be a country where we tend to make that slow, steady progress forward. That doesn't seem to be the American path. It seems that we have to reach these inflection points where we're literally getting existential, where the American experiment is either going to go off the tracks or take a step forward, that we can never summon the will to do anything. There was a labor movement prior to the Great Depression. It had been moving on for decades, but it took that flashpoint for people to really reimagine and reconceive what work could look like in this country. It unfortunately took the combination of COVID and a video of George Floyd and many other things coming together for us to begin to reimagine some of the things Lanish is talking about here. So, it's usually in these pressure cooker moments where we can find whatever will we have to take steps as a country. So, as hard as these last couple of years have been, I'm a believer that, that some of the things that we're seeing here are not going to fade away, but actually can become a more permanent part of our story and a broader part of our story going forward.
Thank you, Justin. And are there particular initiatives that you're seeing either at FDR Park specifically or more generally in the city department that you work in that you feel like are examples of that?
Yeah, I think even in government too, which is one of the slowest sectors in many ways to make these adjustments, I find these conversations about diversity, racial equity, pushing ourselves, beyond sort of a sense of color blindness as a level of is something racially correct, is something politically correct or not, to sort of higher levels of digging. I'm starting to see that happen now. I think it's, we're not bearing the fruit of all those works yet, but I believe that's showing up in the public space conversation. To move it more to the area I work in, I do think that the strains and stresses of COVID for many people created an appreciation and a reconnection to public space in a city that is very, very different from where we were in 2019. I think people, at a point where private spaces were less available to us, we suddenly became aware again, for many folks, of the treasure of public space and how important that space was. Having space where you could have air to breathe, where you could have access to nature. That definitely, shot up. And what we've seen in the park, we had a situation at FDR Park pre-COVID, maybe had 10 to 15 active volunteers in a park, now have 250 active volunteers in a park. Just talking about different expressions that I think were driven by a lot of the economic pressures and the space pressures of COVID that have created something beautiful. FDR has a long tradition of street food vending, mostly from immigrant communities who utilize the park. During COVID, and once again, I think this was driven by economic need in families and just the pressure of closed spaces, FDR went from having about 30 active street food vendors to nearly 100 in a span of months during COVID. Now, that was born out of stress, and yet the result of that is it now has national attention. FDR is one of like the most incredible American public space food scenes in the country. So this came out of a period of turmoil, but I think also an administration that I think was thinking about this expansion of vending in the park and thinking about it through issues of economic equity, through thinking about it through issues of racial and cultural justice, didn't push back against that, but actually said, no, this is something we have to work with. This is something that's beautiful and important for South Philadelphia. So I think that's where there was rising need, rising expressions of folks, and maybe some rising awareness in government that have really created, I think, a special situation in FDR that maybe wouldn't have happened without COVID. So silver linings for sure. It certainly was difficult years, but beautiful things are happening because we were pushed to a point of stress in our systems, pushed to a point to break out of complacency.
I just want to add that when I think about, where we are now, where we want to go from here, I think it gave everyone the opportunity to think outside the box. I know you think like these are artistic people and they're so creative, but the push, to LaNeshe's point, to go live, right? And display your craft in a way that you've never had the opportunity to before. And it was acceptable, and for some folks it was profitable. And then for some folks it just offered more exposure. And I think that the now created what's next and what can we look forward to in the future, and kind of marrying it to the experience of beautiful displays of outdoor culture and arts activities that we've seen around the city. And then in my office, we have been embracing doing some theater of the oppressed work, like legislative theater, because I used to sit on the board of a theater company. So I've been thinking about ways that we can bring people into government differently and more creatively. So we've been talking about finding issues that we can use the arts to kind of help people get connected and get involved. And I see, that's where we want to go from here. Like, how can we provide and open up more opportunities for arts and culture to be displayed in policy, in legislation, in a way that we've never seen before, and then also connected to the beautiful public spaces like our parks, and just to get to enjoy that in a different way. Also educate folks around, the issues that are very important to what's next for Philadelphia.
Thank you so much, Kendra. And if those types of trainings become available for us municipal workers, just let us know. I can imagine that would be quite popular. Keon, do you want to add anything on this topic?
What I was thinking about was how, I think the struggle of like workers struggle, and how it becomes sort of a motor or energy for some of the creative work as well, right? Like how it becomes an inspiration, whether it's in film. And I'm still kind of waiting to see what it looks like. Like when I look back at some of like previous historical, worker struggles, you start to see a whole lot of film production and artwork, that is produced that reflects that. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like in the present moment. Recently I've been seeing lists. It looks like people have been, creating lists of movies that look at working class life and working class political struggle. So I feel like that's a way that people are starting to connect themselves to the moment, and also starting to look forward in terms of what we need. I think, like Justin said, we certainly have pushed. We are at an inflection point. I don't think we're done. I don't think we pushed far enough. And I think that, like, perhaps we'll talk about it later, but questions about how we have been living, I think all of that is up in the air now, right? Like, there was a period of time during the pandemic when you had so few cars on the road, and my coworkers who aren't exactly environmentalists all commented on the fact that for a period there was less accidents. There were also the air was cleaner, and that's something people experienced, right? Followed by people back in the streets, and there's a lot of accidents, right? So you see already night and day sort of that contrast, but then also follow with flooding and things like that. So I feel like this whole entire period of time is calling for practical consideration for what this next New Deal will look like in terms of infrastructure, in terms of changing the pace of life, in terms of changing the I guess modalities of travel and all that kind of stuff. So those are things that are kind of like rambling on my mind right now, and I'm looking forward to see what the art world is also like, how the art world interprets some of these things as well. So.
Yeah, those are beautiful comments, truly, and it really shows how important those intersections are, and how, our everyday lived experiences are really so connected. So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective, and I do want you to say more on that. The last question that I wanted to share with our panelists is really, again, with this look to the future, when we think about sets of proposed policies like the Green New Deal, if something like that were to ever go into effect, or other initiatives that we've mentioned this evening, what could that look like on the ground here in Philadelphia?
Susanna, when I think about policies like the Green New Deal and the massive investments in climate and infrastructure, initially I thought about when they first proposed the Build Back Better agenda, as I mentioned earlier, which was pretty similar to the New Deal in that, they see the problem as needing in order to get it, we need equally ambitious solutions. And what we keep seeing is like, we're just addressing the tip of the iceberg, not going deeper, not getting to the root, and not really talking about rebuilding. Because we realized, through the pandemic, when a social safety net was removed from most Americans, and all the things as an activist for many years, all the things that we fought for that they said could not happen, all of a sudden was able to happen. So we know that the things that we're fighting for is not off basis. It's about the will of folks to be able to do it. And when we think about, the climate crisis, right? Just simply the fact, to Keon's point, that, the emissions, we curbed it a little bit for a year, right? And, we put out some money towards houses in the homeless crisis, and, maybe do a couple of public housing units across the country and offer some subsidies. That really didn't bring about real change. We need to do more of it intentionally in order for us to see the real change. And I think that's what this moment calls for. We need like real policies where we can just see this happen immediately. And I think right now, to Philadelphia, we have so many crises on the horizon. We're talking about the rapid gentrification that we see in every neighborhood. Before you can point to certain neighborhoods, not one neighborhood in the city is exempt from gentrification, right? And we also see it with the rental market. I ran on a platform that say rent is too damn high. We see it even more so now. Rent is very high, no matter where you live in a city. We need to focus on making housing affordable for working families, period. Folks need to be able to rent somewhere comfortably as well as buy if they choose to. We look at our schools, they're toxic and underfunded and have been underfunded for years. So those investments that need to be done in order for us to see or really envision what Philadelphia can be like for our children, and for me, my grandchildren as well, right? And then we talk about minimum wage. Everyone was so upset that no one, we can't get back to the restaurants. We can't go because no one wants to go to work. Pay people a living wage. Like, if we pay people fairly, they'll go to work. Most people don't mind working. People want respect, they want dignity, and they want to be able to take care of their families. So we need to offer that in a way. And I think we have to continue to push on these. And right now, we have the opportunity to just create something different. Whether it's with the labor shortage and how can we see more jobs, more good jobs, more union jobs, more jobs with dignity and benefits to help us get back to those things, to help people to be able to afford to live here, to help people to be able to take care of their families, And I think when we start pursuing the whole idea of the New Deal and the policies, first thing I think about all the problems. We see so many problems. There's so many things we need to fix, but we also need to see the investments. And we all need to be looking at what these investments look like in order for us to change these structural inequities that we've seen since the 1930s. Like, these aren't new inequities, and we need to continue to focus on that. So I think we need to be kind of drawing some lessons from the 1930s now, and create an agenda that doesn't leave anyone behind. When I think about the encampment at Kensington, there needs to be solutions for that. We need to make sure people are safe, protected, and part of safety when we talk about, that means a place to live, a place for you to come out of your systems in a way that's safe and structured. And I think that we have to continue to push for that. And I think we need to create it across the gamut. It can't be like a Democratic versus Republican issue. You know what I mean? Or me, working families. Let's make it an issue. This is a people issue. It's a humanity issue. And, and stick to the fact that we all rally around the one true fact that we all believe that everyone deserves a livable environment. I don't think too many people would dispute that. That affordable housing is a necessity, right? Good education is necessary. Workplace protections, we need those. We saw that during the pandemic. And one of the hardest fights I had was around paid sick leave, saying that people can take off work if they're sick or their loved one is sick. Who would have thought that would be something we would be fighting for right now? And it was only during the pandemic. It's not like long-standing. And we need to continue to work on things like that. And I think we just have to continue down this path and come up with a collective solution towards what a Green New Deal looks like for Philadelphia. That includes all of these things, and find a way to unite working people towards a shared vision towards a livable future. Because I think about even the place where we meet contention, where we're talking about the uprisings or Marconi Plaza, no matter what we believe in, right? Outside of racism and bigotry, collectively, I believe that most people believe that all kids should have a quality education. We might figure out how we're supposed to pay for it. That might be the argument, but you basically believe we deserve that, right? And housing should be affordable. Even when I argue with the landlords and landlord lobbies, most of us believe that people should have a place to stay. And I think that that is what we have to collectively rally around. What does this time, this era signify for our city, and what a Green New Deal will look like for Philadelphia? And that's something my office has been working on, and we'll continue to work through mapping that out. Like, what does that look like for us, and how can we use that as a way to resolve so many of the other issues that I mentioned before? And let's get to a place where, Philadelphia is really and truly the city of brotherly love, right? Like, we're taking care of each other. And I think that that's possible. I mean, no matter how hard the fight is going to be, I think if we continue having this conversation about shared beliefs and shared values, when it's centered around basic humanity, we can eventually get to that point.
And just to build a little bit off of what Councilperson Brooks put a real fine point on, we need to define and articulate what a Green New Deal looks like for Philadelphia and looks like for an individual. I think it's actually amazing that this is almost a household term at this point, right? 5 years ago, an idea like this might have just been talked about by organizers or radicals or academics, and it's a term, but I think many households could not articulate what a Green New Deal is going to do for them, right? They can sense that we may be at a point where we are at a point of climate crisis, that we're at a point of economic crisis, that at the intersection of those things and their solutions could lie a Green New Deal. I think the reason the original New Deal, as flawed as it was and as burdened by the inequities of American racism as it was, as almost anything this country was producing at that time, it was hard for the right to attack and tear down the New Deal because what it produced for people was very evident. You didn't have a job, and then the New Deal happened, then you did have a job. Social Security did not exist, and then it did exist. You were on the street, and then public housing came into existence. These were very close, again, major issues of equity and how they were delivered and who had access to them. But these were clear crises to which this answered a direct and immediate question on what it was going to do for your life. I think we have a challenge as leaders in Philadelphia to articulate, if we believe a Green New Deal is the solution, what is that going to do on the street for the Philadelphian who is struggling with climate change and the climate crisis, which is becoming increasingly a struggle in our city, and the economic disparities, which are increasingly becoming a reality in the city. Growing up in Philadelphia my whole life, there was a point where, at least I felt like, you might have been poor or low income or struggling to get by, but most people you looked around at, you were. You know what I mean? Like, you looked around and, your immediate neighbor was mostly in the same boat. As Councilman Brooks talks about this era of gentrification, I think we're really talking about an era of economic inequity in this city, when there are two Philadelphias happening simultaneously, Philadelphia of rising wealth and a Philadelphia of struggling wealth cohabitating, and the frictions that are showing up in those spaces. Unless we can produce an answer to that, it's not there. I want to believe the work at FDR Park, part of what we are building as a department right now is to imagine how can we address some very clear, very localized environmental issues around, I think, access to natural lands, but also stormwater management and flooding in South Philadelphia. But how can we do it in a way that's actually driving employment, job training, and job opportunities to the communities that need it most? Unless you can demonstrate what it means in someone's neighborhood, it's going to remain an abstract idea that is vulnerable to the boogeymanning of the right wing, right? Say, oh, that's creeping socialism. That is going to destroy it. Until we can say what it is and show it, not just say it, but show it on the ground and point to it. That's where we got to do it. I think we have to be as cities piloting Green New Deals. I think this concept is more likely to emerge in our neighborhoods and our cities than it is to emerge in Washington, D.C. and trickle down to us. It needs to eventually come from Washington, but the proof of the concept will emerge in cities, which is one of the few places where I think we have the political will and the creativity to actually think about how we achieve transformational things that address economic injustice, that address racial injustice, address climate injustice, and the collective challenges of climate change. So I hope we start to see more of those pilots and experimentations in the coming years, and that Washington can pick up on what is happening and working in American cities and use that as the model for the more holistic American reform that we need.
And I'll jump in here to say that is using the arts to build the advocacy from the people about those things is a key place where the arts can play a role, because there is sometimes a divide. People understand that they are not living in a way that they want to be, the ideal way. They know that there's a better way to do things, but the articulation of how that could even change, especially for a person who all they have in their energy because of their wages and their work, all they're doing is working. And so being able to use the arts to showcase to folks what some of these answers are to situations, to showcase to them, to bring them onto the advocacy side so that we have more of the people to support the ideas and the policies that people are putting forth, I think is very important. And I think looking at, I'll drop in my favorite little tool here in the chat, looking at this, so the Americans for the Arts put together this cute little kind of infographic thing that essentially explains how the arts can help within kind of all things, how it can help within economy, within infrastructure, within education, especially education, for many schools who have lost art teacher, music teacher, all of these different areas that are important for students who might learn differently, students who can't just learn from kind of the structure of learning that is left when you take arts out of them. being able to bring in teaching artists to help support these type of students, to be able to bridge that gap of what schools many have lost in the way of being able to pay for a full-time music teacher or art teacher, like, is extremely important in bolstering the education of our children, especially who are in the more low-income schools. Being able to, and I think supporting, the thing about arts and culture also is that the arts and culture sector is a whole set of people that also need employment, that also need support. And so looking at them also as folks who are generally involved, that can be supporters of policies, that can help enact policies, that can use creative thinking to help things move forward. Like, I imagine a world in which we are able to really activate, especially the individual and independent artists, the smaller community-based organizations, like those organizations that are on the ground are such an asset to help move things forward. And then even looking at the other end, when we're talking about the larger organizations, if we were looking at Center City, or really in any neighborhood that has collection of art spaces, bringing people back to those spaces is bringing business back to those areas, as restaurants and things like that are trying to come back post-pandemic. So also looking at the arts as a tool for reinvigorating and bringing folks back to different areas of the city as everything is trying to rebuild again.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with pretty much everything that's been put out there, and I want to go back to what's been on my mind. I think Councilwoman Kendra Brooks mentioned this, and that is, starting from the point, I think our point of departure has to be that of human needs and human development. That has to be our perspective for which we start to think about building out the Green New Deal and whatnot. So, like, for me, what does it look like in Philadelphia? I mean, it's revamping the education system as a whole, right? So that's, of course, it's the physical buildings, right, that are that are toxic and poisonous, and it's actually pretty. It's a disgrace that there are so many people teaching and attempting to learn, working in these spaces, and everybody knows that these places are killing the people that are in it. I mean, that's if this had been in another country, we'd be on Human Rights Watch or something like that right now for what's going on. So there's that, and I was thinking about this quote from W.E.B. Du Bois, and it's I'll paraphrase it, but he says that education is a process for developing and pulling out our human powers, our human drives, right? And in a city like Philadelphia, where we're seeing so much violence, poverty, illness, you name it, it seems to me that the education system has to be ground zero for a lot of the work, right? So we need to have people who not only have good skills in terms of what might be good for the workforce, we also need people who can, interpret the world around them and express it in different ways. And we need people who can think critically about the problems that we're facing, because, it's going to take many generations to undo the harm that we've done, not only in the city, but in the country as well. We need healthcare. That's something that's often kind of put out of the Green New Deal legislation or resolutions, Medicare for all, or some type of national healthcare system, so that we can have healthy minds and healthy bodies, so that we, folks can do what they need to do. I think that's very important. I mean, as a real worker, we definitely see the impacts of that. Many of us don't. The reality is we don't make it 5 years. About 50% of us don't make it 5 years after retiring, because, the job breaks you, right? And living conditions eventually tear you up. So I think about that. I think about the jobs. I think about the federal jobs guarantee. Like, how are we going to guarantee that everyone who would like to work and has the ability to be able to do the work finds good, quality employment? I mean, you can look around the city, there's plenty of work that needs to be done. Unfortunately, when you have a system that's driven by, by the market and a profit motive, then, what needs to be done in terms of dealing with human need is not always addressed, right? Often is unaddressed. And so I think that's a really big part. We have to start thinking creatively about, again, transportation systems, and how we're cleaning up the air, but also how we're putting people to work, rebuilding the transportation infrastructure. I mean, I'm biased, I guess, because I'm a rail person, but from what I've been reading, it seems that railroads have some of the lowest emissions, and would be a central part of any type of project to renew our environment and things of that nature. We got to clean up our water supplies. I forgot the number, but they were talking about the plumbing some years ago, a couple of years ago, and it would take 100 years at the current rate for Philadelphia to replace all of its, corroded pipes and whatnot. We need to speed that up. So to me, it means accelerating that process, putting more people to work, rebuilding the plumbing system. And I think the other big part of it is that it's got to be, this kind of work has to be led from the bottom, right? It's got to be truly democratic. It's got to be led by the working people. It's got to be led by community members that are actually part of the process of planning this stuff and figuring out how to do it. And it brings it to the last part, which is, in the one difference that there is currently between now and the 30s is that in the 30s, you had, and I'm probably gonna get in trouble for this, but you had a labor movement, right? Which, number one, was not restricted just to trade unionists, right? Trade unionists, we represent one wing of the labor movement, but there's a whole lot of other workers out there who are not in trade unions who nonetheless are organizing, right? At that time, we had a broader vision and we had a sense of independence, that our goal was to be a force that spoke for working people and that consisted of working people. And that we were putting forward a vision in a very material way for the kind of world that working people should live in. Today, our movement is, we have some folks that are breaking out of that, but we still have far too many of us are dependent on our current political, on the current political parties, Republican, Democrat, whatever. The reality is that the power to change society has always come from working people or working class people saying that they've had enough. And that's the story of the New Deal that often gets overlooked. I think a lot of emphasis is put on, government policy, but a lot of that policy was a reaction to a bigger threat, which was that working people had enough. And they were tired of the kind of society they lived in. They were tired of the market system, and they were ready to to move on and do something different. And the response was, well, maybe we can actually begin to address some of these things. Maybe we can have Social Security. Maybe we can have some kind of housing. Maybe we, so that's the thing. I think the struggle, a renewed movement of working people, in the broader sense of that, is necessary if we want to begin to make this thing real.
Thank you so much, Keon, and for everyone sharing their thoughts about this last question and the previous ones. I'm going to move into our Q&A portion. And actually, we have a related question as the first question. I'll read it out loud, and I want everyone else to feel free to continue to add questions in the chat, and we'll get to them. So the first question that we have is from Michael. The big question for me on the local level is, where does the money come from to pay for the New Deal?
I would say that when we think about a new deal and new structures, working in city government and being a part of where does the money come from? We spend a lot of money in this city on some of these same things that we're saying that need to be revamped, revised, and made better. So there's definitely if we're talking about revisioning and creating something new, we do have money that we're currently spending that goes into these current systems. Sometimes they just aren't efficient. And I know I might get in trouble for saying that, but the fact is all the money that we spend in the city, some programs are working and some programs aren't. What are programs that we can revise and make them stronger to support what this new deal could be? I've been a strong push for, into the tax abatement. I mean, that's a real thing. We give away a lot of money in the city that can go directly to public education. I think most people kind of dug in a little bit, like if we invest in our future, we can see things better long-term. And currently and historically, we have done a bad job of funding our schools. So we're talking about, we have multiple generations of folks that have graduated out of our school system that are unable to compete for the jobs that are on the table. That is a failure that we have made intentionally. So when we said there were certain things we need, no one says where the money is going to come from, but we've seen our city and our country continually, not fund education, and education is the step towards the future. And we talk about environmental issues. Keon mentioned about, infrastructure. The disinvestment in infrastructure over years have led us to where we are now. Like, what solutions can we put in place to change what that looks like? Can we put a plan in place to change those 100 years into 50 years? And, I think it's just about rethinking and reimagining what that looks like and continually bringing these up. And that's why it's important that we create a Green New Deal just for Philadelphia. Justin said it perfectly. Like, we have the opportunity to create this thing that we want to see, even if it's 20 years out. We have to create a plan and put systems in place that'll be working for us later on. It's not like a cookie cutter solution, and it's not like a silver bullet. Like, actually, we just did get a huge influx of money that we could have spent in a lot of different ways to put this on the right path. But that wasn't completely my decision on how that money was spent. But that's what we need to do. We need to come up with a plan and forward thinking. And I agree with Keon that I believe, I'm in legislation now, but I'm a true believer, is that true vision comes from folks on the ground. True vision comes from folks who are impacted by these issues, whether it's the massive floods that are happening out in Southwest Philadelphia. I'm trying to think of it. Elmwood, I think. I'm trying to think of the name of the area. Or we're talking about the flooding that's happening all over the city, right? The people that are being affected by that, which in turn, we end up giving money from the city to support these floods and to bring families out of disasters, have been a part of that. I think we just need to be far more intentional on what it looks like. So no, it's not a cookie cutter answer, but I do believe that we have money. I think it's a choice of how we decide to spend money and have a plan as to what we're going to do next. That's how I see that.
If I could just add to that, council member, and to answer Michael's question, at least from this perspective, yes, ultimately, Philadelphia alone cannot solve the climate crisis. Like, we got to acknowledge that those solutions are national and in fact international for those. When we are talking about equity, when we're talking about the American economy, that will not be reformed by an entire city. But where Councilmember Brooks is right on is, but the funds we are spending in the city is just reinforcing the broken notions that we already have out there. We're not investing in an innovative new notion on how we do things. You know what I mean? If we're still managing our parks with huge volumes of herbicides and pesticides, we are not advancing a Green New Deal, right? Like that's the choice point that we make in how we're investing. If we are investing in car-centric infrastructure, that is not advancing a Green New Deal. If we are investing in economic systems which are producing gross inequities, we're not advancing that. I think the obligations on cities is not to solve the entire problem, but to pilot and demonstrate the solutions. And I would argue we have more than enough resources to start showing what's working. And I think we are doing it in some pockets, but not enough. And I'll say, if you haven't come to FDR Park, it is a great park to come to. I think it's a park where you can see a different approach to public space management that does incorporate some of the ideas we're talking about today. I think it is a question more of political will and creativity at the city level, and a determination to work harder, not to do just what we have been doing before, but to work harder because we believe we're demonstrating something different. And I think that belief needs to permeate more sectors of the work for us to achieve these outcomes. And then just to speak to money and to say to FDR Park, we're in the beginning stages of a $200 million capital investment in FDR Park to build a nationally leading public space here in Philadelphia. That is enough resources to do tremendous things. And I would argue it's a project and a program where we have had that kind of ecologically forward-thinking thought, where we are thinking about these issues and we are capable of producing those outcomes. And I think in Philadelphia, we're too quick to say, oh, we don't have the money, we can't do anything. I think that's a classic Philadelphia narrative that holds us back too often. I think this city is capable of incredible things and demonstrates that over and over again, even if it's not being demonstrated by the government, but it's being demonstrated by the people. And if we could harness the creativity and the resourcefulness of the people of Philadelphia, we could produce the kind of outcomes I think that the folks who are attending this conference or participating in this panel discussion tonight would like to see.
Yeah, basically rolling in kind of everything that all three of my co-panelists have said. The thing is that we do need creative thinking for the use of the money that we already have. And to Keon's point, I think a lot of that does need to be actually tapping into the people most affected by these things, having them have investment, allowing them to be a part of the thinking around the solutions would allow us to make better decisions, make, experiment, but have smart experiments. And looking at it, and it's like, and I'm not an economist or anything, but it's like when we as individual people, or even as people who run organizations, when we see that something is off with the budget in conjunction with there being a problem, we look at it, we see where are we spending money that's not working? How do we change that so that our money is working for us? And like really looking at that question and changing like the council person has said, like the education system in Philadelphia, we've been doing it wrong for a long time. So it can't hurt to think wildly creative about solving these problems. Try some things out to make a difference when everything we've already been doing is not working. So it's not even necessarily a matter of finding new money yet. It's making our money work smarter. And again, connecting that to actually working with local nonprofits, local people, neighbors, arts organizations, bringing in, because most likely they have been working on a mini micro level, doing the work for a small community of people that the city would hope to do across the whole city.
All right, and I'm going to go ahead and read our next question, which is a bit of a comment as well, but I really appreciate what is shared here. Virginia writes, I think we do have to create something new and we can learn from history. The WPA is a good example of how a government-funded jobs program can restart the economy and help workers, including artists. There is a more recent example, the Bipartisan Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, signed into law by Richard Nixon. CETA, I think is how you say it, employed 20,000 cultural workers across the country. Many of the CETA administrators and designers are still alive. How can their expertise be tapped? And I'll just add, we actually did have the honor of having a program with some folks that were local to the CETA program. And if there is interest, we could put those folks in touch with presenters or others who are attending this program. So again, the question is sort of like, how can we look at the expertise of folks that are still around who have participated in some of these past programs, including CETA?
I would suggest since you're speaking nationally, so I think the conversation would be to create the folks that are national. But if you know of some folks that were originally a part of this, I welcome new ideas on how to connect this to like larger WFP issues. But locally, if you have some folks to reach out to my office, please feel free to connect them. I'll put my information in the chat and just make a connection and have a conversation if they're interested in, talking true policy. There's a few other groups that we work with that the names aren't coming at the top of my head right now at 8:00. But if we have this continued conversation, I'm willing to make that connection. I'll put my information in the chat and have them reach out to our office.
Thank you so much. And I think, at the heart of this question is something that I'm really passionate about, which is sort of the storytelling piece, the piece around, really connecting with our elders. And just, for me, that's also part of what we do at the library is, we have these amazing resources and services that do tell a story. And in fact, this exhibit is built out of some of those sort of primary sources that then connect back to people who, either lived in Philadelphia or are still living in Philadelphia. And I just wonder if anyone else can kind of speak to the ways that we can be doing this work more sort of intergenerationally and perhaps we have some examples that we're already able to kind of do that work in our everyday lives.
I don't have anything like specifically to that, but also kind of along with intergenerational, I think it also is like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are other cities like making steps forward and doing the work. So I guess my question is like, how do we make the right connections to mirror good things happening in other cities? Like in San Francisco, I think also in St. Paul, Minnesota, they enacted like a pilot program of universal basic income for artists. So it was like, I think someone doing like $500 a month or someone doing $1,000 a month. That was essentially to support the artists and being able to dedicate time to their creative works and not have to have a second job, and also like supporting throughout the pandemic. So like programs like that, how can we like mirror and model things that are already out there? And also like looking at that as a way of doing, like there was a few hundred people in like the first set of this program in most of the cities, but like that kind of experimentation, like how do we take a chance to experiment to see the end result of those kind of things?
Thank you. Does anyone else want to share examples or ideas around this topic? All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I want to offer our panelists a chance to share any closing comments. And then I'm also going to drop a few links in the chat, including freelibrary.org/exhibitions, which is an opportunity to engage with For the Greatest Number. Of course, we also have our in-person exhibit that is open to the public free of charge on the 3rd floor of Parkway Central at 1901 Vine in our Dietrich Gallery. And that space is currently open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And online, you'll also find additional resources. We have everything from playlists to blog posts to connections to our digital resources. Because as I shared earlier, this exhibit is built out of our special collections and our research department collections. So these are all materials that everyone has access to. And, we've talked a lot about kind of connecting the dots around the past and the present. And these materials are available on view in the gallery, and then additional materials are available when you schedule a research visit with our various special collections. And so I would encourage you to engage with our materials. They're there for you. And we really love being able to have people with varied interests engage with those materials. So I'll drop that link in the chat. And then I also know some of our presenters have shared links as well. So thank you. And then I'll open the floor to closing comments. And then we'll finish out our evening. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you, Susanna, for having us, and also like pointing out this as a lovely set of like cross-sector collaboration and discussion, because none of the things are going to move forward without us like bringing together all of the sectors to move forward the things that are important to everyone.
Yeah, I want to just thank you for having me out today. And like Lanish said, this was like amazing opportunity to share thoughts. I definitely want to get Lanish's information. She is the one person on this panel I do not know. And I would love to see some of the work that you guys do at the theater. I would love to come out and visit. And then, you know, I want to thank the folks that ask really good questions and continue to be involved with this work. And yeah, just continue to stay involved and send information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to my office, especially because we appreciate intergenerational learning and growth. I think it's important that we bring together the old and the new in order for us to create a vision. So let's keep this dialogue going. And, you know, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone who has, you know, pretty good questions. And I'm glad also, again, to be on this panel. Appreciative of the different perspectives that were discussed by my fellow panelists. And just right now, I'm thinking about how, like, you know, artists, for example, could kind of educate us in the labor movement in terms, you know, by helping to put together like a picture of the future, you know, some type of expression or interpretation of it to help us to imagine. And I'm thinking about like the work that Justin's doing in terms of, you know, really modeling different management of the public space. And so I'm very eager to go down and check it out. And then thinking about Councilwoman Brooks and how, you know, we're gonna have to put the fight on paper and into city government in order to make it happen. So I do see how they're all coming together, and I hope we continue this conversation. So
just want to say really honored to be on a panel with so many great Philadelphia leaders today. And you know, I think I would just say to the folks attending tonight, as draining and as challenging as these last 2 years have been, just keep grinding. I do believe these are the periods where the hard-fought victories in this country happen, right? This is the exact environment where we break through and we do something different. The time is right now. Stay with it. I believe there's going to be wins from where we're going now. So stick with it, and I think a better future is coming.
Thank you so much, and huge gratitude to our panelists. So much gratitude to everyone who was able to join us tonight. And we are going to be offering this recorded session on our YouTube channel, so look forward to that. And just many, many thanks for having this opportunity for us to all come together. Again, feel free to visit our exhibit For the Greatest Number at 1901 Vine, and just continue to use the library. We're really excited to continue to offer exhibitions into the future and have relevant programs like this. So thank you again to everyone for making this night so engaging and so hopeful. And we'll see you soon. Have a wonderful evening. Bye, everyone.
bye-bye. Thank you, Susanna.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.